Hi, everyone. So we're going to continue our discussion of free will, and in particular, we're going to be looking at one of the views that we delineated the last video. We looked at three different views: hard determinism, which says that there is no free will, and that the causal determinism thesis and the incompatibilism thesis is true. We looked at libertarianism, that says that you do have free will, but that the causal determinism thesis needs to be rejected, and the incompatibilism thesis is true. And finally, we looked at soft determinism, or compatibilism, that says that the free will thesis and the causal determinism thesis is true, but the incompatibilism thesis is false. All of that was in our last two lectures. What we're going to do today is look at hard determinism, and in particular, we're going to be looking at our reading, and we're going to be looking at Holbach, who defends hard determinism. So he thinks that there is no free will. I want to take a moment to talk about a couple of his passages, and I want to look at what he says. We're going to do that for a couple of reasons. One is because when certain philosophers are writing, they are presenting arguments, as we've seen all semester, and sometimes you can't always see in the language that they're using or the way that they phrase things that what they're doing is giving an argument. So we're going to touch down in the text a little bit today so I can pull out of that some arguments or lines of reasoning so that it will make sense what exactly they're trying to say if just you're getting lost in the words or the way that they've put things. Another reason we're going to be doing it is because the way that he puts things is persuasive for many, so it's good to take a look at it. And if at the end of the day you think hard determinism is completely false and you do have free will, then you're going to want to see what you need to argue against. So let's begin. We're going to take a look at this quote right here. And here he says the following: "Man's life is a line that nature commands him to describe upon the surface of the earth without his ever being able to swerve from it, even for an instant. He is born without his own consent. His organization does in no wise depend upon himself. His ideas come to him involuntarily. His habits are in the power of those who cause him to contract them. He is unceasingly modified by causes, whether visible or concealed, over which he has no control, which necessarily regulate his mode of existence, give the hue to his way of thinking, and determine his manner of acting. Nevertheless, in spite of the shackles by which he is bound, it is pretended he is a free agent." Now, one of the reasons we want to look at this quote is because he's giving us some reasons to think that we don't have free will. He talks about the fact that we are born into our world without our consent. We don't choose to be born, we just are. So he says that we are born without our own consent. His organization does in no wise depend upon himself. So the way that you're built, the way that you're made, the fact that you are genetically disposed to do the things that you are, none of that is under your control. No one asks if you want to be born, you just find yourself existing. So he starts with the very beginning, that you just find yourself in existence. And he says, look, all along in your life, you are subject to forces that you can't control. And once we're born and we're here and we have the genetic makeup that we do and we have the sort of human body that we have and we're under the laws of nature that we are, we just have to go with that, and that's just what we're given, and we have to deal with it from there. Now, a lot of people think, yeah, of course, I'm not consulted before I'm born. I just, arrive here, and nobody thinks really that your first free choice is, do I want to exist or not? That's not when people think you're free. They think, okay, look, you're here, and then you start making free choices, maybe once you start to learn about things. But that's where Holbach says a little bit more, that even your desires and your beliefs are something that you are sort of beholden to, that you have to act in accordance with those desires and beliefs, and that's just even more material for you to realize that you're not free. You may pretend that you're free. We act as if we're free, as we talked about a couple of videos ago, but you're not really free. I'm going to show one more quote. So in this one, The Holbach says, the will is necessarily determined by the qualities, good or bad, agreeable, painful, of the object of the motive that acts upon his senses. His action is the result of the impulse he receives either from the motive, from the object, or from the idea which has modified his brain or disposed his will. When he does not act according to his impulse, it is because there comes some kind of new cause, some new motive, some new idea which modifies his brain in a different manner. So the thought here is that when you're trying to act, you usually do it because you believe or you desire something. So let's just take something that you think is free. You are sitting here in your chair, maybe at your computer, and you are listening to this lecture. And maybe you're happy about it, maybe you're not. And as you're sitting there listening to this lecture and you're taking in some ideas, you're making some kind of choice, let's suppose, as last time that we used our example, you decide, look, in order to get through this, I need a cup of coffee. So you get yourself a cup of coffee. And we're going to have as our choice, like we did last time, this thing that you think you choose. I choose coffee. And as we said last time when we were talking about why you might think the incompatibilism thesis is true, is that if you think that you do have a free choice, like I choose coffee, you also think that that has a cause. De Holbach's going to agree here. He thinks, yes, anytime you think you have a free choice, like I choose coffee, that's caused by something. And in particular, he's talking about beliefs and desires. So when you say, I choose coffee, this is you believe that if you drink coffee, you'll be more stimulated and then you can get through the rest of your schoolwork, or you desire it because you just have a desire for having it, or you believe that if you drink coffee and you eat some sugar, that that's going to do something to your brain and it's going to make things better. Maybe you just want it, right? So you believe things and you desire them, and it's your beliefs and your desires that cause these things that we call choices. What de Holbach says is, look, these beliefs and desires, what we had talked about last video was what causes these beliefs and desires. And we went and talked about how there might be a causal chain of what caused these beliefs and desires. What de Holbach says is not so much, okay, look at the causal chain, although we will look at that in a minute, but it's this. Ask yourself if the beliefs and desires that you have, if you have control over those. So generally, when you wake up, you have certain beliefs. I'm in this room right now. I'm in Kentucky. I believe that I'm not being deceived by an evil demon. I believe that I'm not dreaming anymore. I believe that I have to get to class, or I need to stay in forever for an indefinite amount of time. You have certain beliefs, and you have certain desires. You desire to stay in bed longer. You desire to get up out of bed. You desire to get up out of your house if you can. So we have a bunch of beliefs and desires. Ask yourself for any one of those beliefs and your desires if you chose to have them. And if you think about the beliefs and desires you have, whatever they are, and you think about whether you chose to have those beliefs, that doesn't seem to be the internal experience that we usually have. We wake up with beliefs. We find ourselves with desires, and very rarely do we choose them. So it turns out that when you say, oh, look, I believe I'm in this room right now. I know we've talked about a lot about that belief in this class because we talked about Descartes and how we know that we're in this room right now. And a lot of you may be wondering whether you are in this room right now. But once you take a belief like that, and when you're not doing philosophy, and you're just ordinarily thinking about beliefs like I'm in this room right now, you don't deliberate about it and you don't choose it. You just find yourself with it. We tend to wake up with these beliefs in our head. I'm in this room right now. I'm holding a pen in my hand. I'm looking at this whiteboard. I'm making this video. These are things that sort of come at me because the world comes at me. I don't have to do any deduction. I don't have to sit there and be like, do I decide to believe I'm in this room right now? Or do I decide to believe I'm not in this room right now? It's not one of those decision type things. I just end up believing something. Similarly with our desires, right? We don't generally choose our desires. We just find ourselves with them. If you're somebody who just really hates coffee and you have no desire for it, then my examples are going to be not appealing to you, but you're just going to find yourself with the desire to have something else aside from coffee. And if you do like coffee, then that's going to be something you find yourself with. So with our beliefs and desires, they don't seem to be the sort of things that we choose. They're the sorts of things that we find ourselves with. And in particular, it seems like these passions, these things that are good and bad, are not things that we get to decide. So not only do we not decide what beliefs that we have or desires that we have, we don't get to decide the strengths of them either, the weights of your beliefs and your desires. One thing you can ask yourself is, all right, let's suppose, which is not the case, but let's suppose I had $1 million and I said, look, I have $1 million. In fact, I have lots of millions of dollars, and I will give you $1 million if right now you can get yourself to believe that you are skiing downhill very fast in Aspen. You may want to believe it. You may lie to me and say that you do believe it. But even if I were to give you lots and lots of money and say, okay, just make that decision and believe something right now, believe that you are skiing downhill very fast in Aspen, you can't do it. You can't just on a whim be like, okay, now I believe that. Because you don't. You believe you're sitting at your desk, looking at this lecture, drinking some coffee. You may want to be skiing as opposed to doing what you're doing. You may want to be on a beach. You may be wanting to believe lots of things. But it's very difficult to, on a dime, even if I were to give you $1 million, to then change your beliefs. And that resistance for us to, the resistance to changing our belief, even if somebody is persuading you or giving you lots of money and giving you a good motivation to do so, the fact that we can't speaks to the Holbach's point of we can't choose our beliefs and desires. So this goes beyond the little causal chain that we were talking about a couple of videos ago, even though we did talk about this and talked about how, look, if you're in this causal chain that eventually ends in what you think is you choosing coffee. What to Holbach's point is, well, just go here and ask yourself, did you choose these things? And his thought is going to be, no, you didn't choose them at all. Something else chose them for you. And who knows what it is? It's probably genetics. It's how you're made. Right? It's the makeup of your brain. It's all the mechanics of going on, everything that's going on in your head. So how your brain is made up, all the chemicals that are going around in it, everything that's going on, the neurochemistry, everything that is subject to the laws of nature. So the reason you have the beliefs and desires that you have, according to Holbach, is totally determined by the chemical and physical makeup of you and your body. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the mind-body problem and whether you think that you are just a material substance. This is where the Holbach is coming from. Yes, you are a completely material substance, and as such, you are subject to the laws of nature, including how your brain works, including how your beliefs and desires are formed, because when it comes down to it, those are just determined by the laws of nature. Why do you believe and desire the things that you do? Well, there's probably lots of reasons, but at least some of them are the fact that your brain is wired in a certain way. If you want to believe something different, instead of giving you $1,000, $1 million, or whatever, I should just try and figure out how to reconfigure your brain. I can do that, then you'll believe something different. So the thought is, you have the beliefs and the desires that you do because of how you are made, because of your genetic makeup, because of how your brain is wired. And those things are not under your control. So what de Holbach thinks is, look, you do what you think that you do, and you think that you choose these things, but really that's just because your beliefs and your desires. Now, a couple of responses can be made here. And one of them is like, well, wait a minute. When it comes to beliefs and desires, sometimes when I'm trying to decide, okay, do I want coffee or don't I have competing desires. Right? Sometimes when you're trying to figure out whether you want coffee or you don't, you might have competing desires. Let's say that you decided, this is a bad week for it, but maybe you decided this week that you wanted to quit coffee. You thought, okay, I'm going to quit coffee. So I'm going to sit at home all day and I'm not going to be able to go out and socialize, but I'm also not going to drink coffee. And you make that decision. It's some kind of pledge. We all do this in small ways. If you've ever tried to exercise more or eat healthier or, any number of habits that you've tried to adopt, you start out with this sort of desire to do this thing. And then inevitably you have these competing desires not to do that thing. And so if you are trying to quit your coffee habit, but you also have your coffee habit, you have two competing desires. One is this sort of meta desire not to drink as much coffee as you do, and the other one is this base desire of, I want coffee all the time. And those two come into conflict. So you might think, look, I've experienced these competing desires, and I very often have had this struggle between wanting to quit to drink coffee and also wanting coffee, and one of them wins. And let's say you think that the meta desire wins. You wanted to quit coffee. You really wanted it, and you resisted temptation. That sometimes is evidence for people to think that they have free will. They chose to do it, right? They knew that they had this addiction to coffee, and they were going to overcome it, and they did, and it was a bit of a struggle, but they did it. That's an example that you might think would cut against what Holbach is saying, right? He is trying to tell you that you always win out with your desires. So here's a case where you make a decision and your desire for coffee gets overridden by your decision to not drink as much coffee. But what Holbach is going to say is, look, your meta desire is a desire just as much as your regular desire is. Your desire to quit coffee is just as much a desire as the desire that you want it all the time. So even if you have this desire to stop drinking coffee, and you have this other desire that says drink coffee all the time, and this one wins, and you stop drinking coffee even though you're winning these competing desires. Just because this one wins doesn't mean you have free will according to Holbach. It just might mean this is the stronger desire. Right? So for Holbach, it's not only that you don't choose your beliefs and desires, you don't choose the weight of them. You don't choose the strength of them. So you don't get to choose whether your desire to stop drinking coffee is stronger than the first order desire for coffee generally. And if it is stronger, then you go with that. And if it isn't, then you go with the other. And that's not up to you, according to Holbach, because your beliefs and desires and the weights of these beliefs and desires are entirely determined by your physical makeup. And that is not something you have a control over. So that's one case in which, even though Holbach is talking about having these causes for what you think is a free choice, he's going to think, no, just look at where these beliefs and desires come from. And for him, it comes all down to material makeup. Now, again, if we're just coming off of the mind-body problem in the mind-body unit, and there might be some of you who are objecting because you think, oh, well, I don't believe in material monism. Fine, but we'll put that on hold on a discussion for another day. But for Holbach, if you grant that you're a physical being in this physical universe and you're subject to physical laws and physical causes, then you have to recognize that anything that you think is free is really just the end result of a causal chain. Okay. Now, you might think there's something called an argument from choice. And this says that, similar to the competing desires point I just made, you might think that not only is it when you've got competing desires, but when you have a really hard choice. So it's not just competing, although that's going to probably entail that you've got some competing desires going on, but if the decision is really difficult. So take, for example, you've got somebody who is tormented with a violent thirst, right? So they're incredibly thirsty. They've just been crawling along in the desert all day, and they're just incredibly thirsty, and they want some water. Here's what de Holbach says. If when tormented with violent thirst, he gives to himself an idea, or really perceives a fountain, whose limpid streams might cool his feverish want, is he a sufficient master of himself to desire or not to desire the object competent to satisfy so lively a want? It will be said, if at this moment it is announced to him that the water he so ardently desires is poisoned, he will, notwithstanding his vehement thirst, abstain from drinking it. So the point is this, that if you have somebody who's incredibly thirsty, and this thirst is just this overwhelming desire, and he's coming up to this water fountain, and he's just so excited, and he's about to take a drink, and then comes to have the belief that it's poisoned. Maybe someone tells him, maybe it's labeled, right? And all of a sudden he's like, oh, I'm really thirsty, but you know what? I'm going to decide not to drink that water because it's poisoned, and I don't want to die that way. I'll just continue with my thirst. Then you might think that you've just made a really difficult decision, and so maybe that shows that you have free will. And this is called the argument from choice. Right? And the thought is, sometimes we make difficult choices, and any difficult choice you would make would be uncaused, right? If you're making that difficult choice, you have a really strong desire to drink that water, but you also know that it's poisoned, and this is a really hard decision, and you make it. You make that decision not to drink it. Then it seems that can't be cause. That has to be all you. And if we sometimes make these uncaused choices, then determinism has got to be false. And if determinism is false, then hard determinism is false. So the thought is, if we have a really, really hard choice and we make it, then that shows that hard determinism is false. What de Holbach says, however, is that, look, this doesn't change his main point. And now I'll go to my next slide. And he says this. The fact, however, is that the motive in either case is exactly the same, his own conservation. The same necessity that determined him to drink before he knew the water was deleterious upon his new discovery equally determines him not to drink. The desire of conserving himself either annihilates or suspends the formal impulse. The second motive becomes stronger than the preceding, that is, the fear of death, or the desire of preserving himself necessarily prevails over the painful sensation caused by his eagerness to drink. So the point is, look, you have a really strong desire to drink because you're thirsty. You also have a very strong desire for self-preservation. And so those are just competing desires, as we were talking about before. And recognizing that competing desires exist doesn't then give you some opening for free will to get in there and say, free will is the thing that sort of gets you to decide between competing desires. What de Holbach says is, no, when you've got competing desires and you do something, all that shows you is which desire was stronger. If you're a very thirsty human being about to take some water and you find out that it's poisoned and then you don't drink it, here's what we know about you. Your desire not to die right now is stronger than your desire to drink water. And that's just how it goes. So for de Holbach, even when we have these moments where it seems like we're making a decision, and if you remember a couple of videos ago, I said that one of the reasons we think that the free will thesis is true is because we feel free. And we treat ourselves and each other as if we are free. We feel free because it feels as if we're making decisions sometimes. And in those moments, that's when we think that the free will thesis is true. But if de Holbach is right, those moments when you feel free, it's really just you kind of like maybe waffling between desires. If there are these weighted desires in your head, this is all a metaphor, but the thought is, look, you have competing desires. He can admit that, but those can be caused by physical things. And that can be caused by some kind of mechanical, physical makeup of your brain. And that these desires are the ones that are ultimately causing what you think is a choice. But when it comes down to it, you always choose the thing you most desire. Always. And so when it comes to you analyzing what you think are free choices, ask yourself if you've ever chosen the thing that you wanted less than the thing you didn't choose, right? And his thought is, no, you always do that. Now, maybe you're disappointed in yourself, right? If I have this desire not to drink coffee and to stop my coffee habit, and I give in to my lower level desires to drink coffee at every moment, then I may be disappointed in myself. But I've really just gone the path of which desires were stronger. And if I had resisted that, then that was the stronger desire. So the thought is that it's always the case that you choose what you most desire, even if that desire competes with other desires that you might have. That doesn't mean that you're free, according to Holbach. It just means that the causes for why you think you've chosen something are more complicated than you think, but it still comes down to you being a physical creature with a physical makeup, and you're determined by physical laws, and that everything from the inside that seems like it really might give you a free choice really is just you being sort of the end of this causal chain, where you are just this mechanical being determined by physical laws.